visual effects guru and artist, Adam Howard. Another one that I didn't know you worked on, Titanic.
Yeah. Titanic was just an amazing film to work on. We all knew when we were working on it that we were working on something special. We didn't realize how huge it was going to be. I don't think anybody did, maybe except Jim. But he was great. I'm one of the few people I think who got on really well with him. But I understood very early on that when Jim asks you to do something, you do exactly what he asks you.
Because he knows it all. He knows how everything works.
And, it sounds like a really arrogant thing to say, but the thing about Jim is that Jim is an absolute genius. He does understand the entire process. And when he says to you, I want you to do it this way, that is the way you do it, because he knows if you do it that way, he knows what the final product is going to look like, and that's what he wants.
Yeah.
So I saw people say, well, we went back to the shop after we talked to you, and we thought maybe this would work better. Oh, why did you say that? That's a bad thing to say, because he didn't like that, and understandably so. We're dealing with a lot of money and a very tight schedule. I was supervising about 200 shots on the film, doing that at Pacific Ocean Post Film Unit, which is called POP Film, and in Santa Monica. And we were about a 6-minute drive away from Lightstorm, that was Jim's company, also based in Santa Monica. And so that was great if we needed to go and have meetings, because we were right there. But one of the producers came in to me one night and he said, so we've got a problem. We've got this shot that Jim wants to put in the first international trailer for the film. And that deadline is coming up very soon. We took it to ILM and showed them the elements that we had, and they said, this shot is not possible with these elements. So then we said, okay, so we'll go to Digital Domain, because Jim owned Digital Domain at the time. And they told him the same thing. So we're coming to you. What do you think? And I looked at it and I just went, I don't know. I guess it's possible. Ultimately, it's just time and money. And if you've got the money, I'll make the time. And so they went, okay, well, we'll go talk to Jim and see what happens. So they told him what I had said, and he goes, he gets the job. Correct answer. And so,
do you remember what the shot was? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a shot. It's a 10-second slow motion shot of Jack and Rose running down the corridor toward camera with the wall of water chasing them down the corridor.
Very famous shot.
It was one of those big moments in the first trailer for the film where people thought, "Oh my God, what's happening?" I mean, everybody knew what happened, but the drama of the moment was great.
Yes.
And so the thing about the shot was that it was not Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio running down the hallway. It was stunt doubles, and I had to take the stunt doubles' heads off and put Kate and Leo's heads on. And because of the way it had been shot hastily, and that made it very difficult to use the footage that they had of Kate running down the dry hallway and Leo running down the dry hallway. So I ended up hand painting their faces for 240 frames. And what I had to paint into all of that was every time Sarah, who was the stunt double for Kate, would hit her foot on the ground, her skin would bounce down, and water was splashing on it and ricocheting off the faces, and I had to be painting all that stuff back in again and making the skin actually do that, and it was crazy. It was 17 hours a day, 7 days a week for 2.5 months, and at about 2 months in, they came to me and they said, this has to be ready tomorrow. And I said, it's not going to be ready tomorrow. And they said, well, you can't say that because Jim wants it tomorrow. And I said, listen, this is a really important shot for him. He wants it to be perfect. If he wants a perfect shot, he can have it in a couple of weeks. If he doesn't care, he can have it tomorrow. You go tell him that. And they went, we're not going to tell him that. And I said, okay, then I'll go tell him that. And so went down to Lightstorm and I explained the situation, and he went, "Okay, we'll wait 2 weeks. It has to be perfect." And so they delayed the international trailer release, and the shot made it, and he was happy. It's again, it's one of those kind of iconic shots that you're lucky enough to work on. But the real thrill was working with him. And so then I was at a screening at Fox after the movie was released, and a screening for cast and crew, and he was there, and he came up to me and he goes, "So you know why that shot was so hard, don't you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I hand painted the whole thing." And he goes, "No, no, no. There's a much cooler reason why it's so hard." And I said, "What is that, Jim?" And he goes, "It's never been done before." And he said, "I knew that it was almost impossible." And he said, "I just wanted to see who was up for the challenge." And he said,
What a
"You made
compliment.
it." So
this is the man who pioneered liquid water on the Abyss and T2, all the liquid metal.
Yeah, and even something like that, that was my friend John Bruno worked on that with Dennis Murin, and John was telling me that when they were trying to do the liquid metal, it was way before the kind of Arete days of Titanic water, and the island was having real difficulty. And somebody said, "Well, hang on, we can do chrome because we've done chrome before for like logos and cars and things." And they said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, why don't we just make the chrome transparent?" And that was the beginning of how they ended up splitting out elements and reworking them and compositing them to make it look like water. But it was actually just based in how they had been doing chrome. And it was just a brilliant way of thinking about something out of the box and making it work, even though it was technically not correct.
And you see it today with the Corridor crew and obviously the huge number of effects artists around the world. They are examining all the physics as you do, the scrunch of the ball or the scrunch of the face or how water reacts, etc., etc. As an effects artist, you actually examine the physics of every element.
Yeah, whether it's a spaceship crashing on an asteroid like we did in Armageddon, or it's a drop of water hitting some chocolate and making a splash of two different viscosity elements. Or it's a leaf blowing down a gutter, but being, hitting a cigarette pack and having some water interact with it. We've got to be aware of all those things and kind of how they look and how they move and how they feel. And so I spend a lot of my time just looking at things and dismantling them in my brain to say, okay, well, I'd pull that into that element and that into that element, and then we combine them to that and remake it to look like that. But yeah, it's a whole thing of observation, and I love that.
Okay, a little sidebar to that. Great. Do you have a mirror at your workstation?
Right here.
There you go. There you go. It is so important for animation, particularly to understand how things work.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was painting a portrait of my mother a few years ago, and I know what her face looks like, and I had a great photo of her that I was painting from, and I was painting in acrylics, and it just didn't look right. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm relying too much on this photo. I'm just going to put it away and just think about what I know of Mum's face. And something that came to me was like, she's got kind of very wet lower eyelid just on the top, and it's always a little sparkly and gives a little sparkle in her eyes. And so I got this tiny little paintbrush that only had like 7 or 8 hairs in it, and got a tiny bit of white paint on it, and I just went dunk dunk on the bottom of the eyelids, and it was her. And it was just that tiny little adjustment that made something look real. And I think, doing visual effects, you find a lot of the time that you have to just keep on working with the artist to get to the point. You don't always just go straight to it. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you just go straight to it. And other times you just have to keep on kind of working on the shot until that happens.
Well, that element of realism, we won't go down this track because we'll never stop. But just briefly, with regards to AI, do you think it can accomplish that?
Yeah, I do. I think it's doing it now. It's adding that level of realism that has required an incredible amount of time. I think the one thing that AI images are missing right now is heart. I think it's going to get there. It's going to get there, and there's going to be people who are making time motion pictures out of AI. Do I think that's right? No. I think again, going back to what I said earlier on, that it's just another tool in the tool belt, and it should be used wisely.
Yes,
it's not the be all and end all. But I think the beauty of this business is that it is an incredibly collaborative business where you all rely on each other's skill sets to bring your work up. And I certainly always look for inspiration from the artists that I'm working with or from other films that are being made. And Jim Cameron was one of the people who has said, if you've got a room full of executives and the janitor walks in and the janitor has the best idea in the room, that's the one you go with.
Yes.
Because you've got to be open to great ideas, and great ideas don't always come from the people who are supposedly the ones coming up with the ideas. Sometimes they just come completely out of left field. And so you got to be open to that always.
Very well put. Okay, so let's talk the third part of a trilogy, but the third part of your personal trilogy, Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith.
I said earlier on I was working at Sony doing Seabiscuit, and I finished on a Friday night, and I was driving off the lot, and ILM called me. Sarah Alvarado, who was the head of recruiting, called me, and she said, "Hey, look, I'm sorry to do this to you on a Friday night, but I know it's never kind of worked out because they'd asked me a few times to go up over the years, but I never could because I was on other shows." She said, we've got this film that we're doing, and we need some help, and we wondered if you could come up and start on Monday. And it's just a 4-week gig. And I said, I am there. She called me as I was driving off the lot at the Sony lot.
Is getting a call from ILM the pinnacle? That's why you're there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was the dream job. I think it is the dream job for everybody in visual effects, is to work at ILM. I know that in 1977, when Star Wars was released, I was there on opening day in Melbourne, and it's just an incredible thing to then walk through those doors and be in the building that made all that stuff. By the time I joined the company in 2003, they had done a lot more credible stuff. And really, there was no question at that point that ILM was the place on the planet that you wanted to work. So getting the phone call was really nice. One of the guys that was working there was a guy that I had working for me at Digital Magic and then at POP as well, Pablo Hellman. And Pablo was supervising Master and Commander. This was the film that I wanted to work on. That was directed by fellow Aussie Peter Weir. And
starred Russell Crowe.
It starred Russell Crowe, yeah. And so they had a scene that had been shot in Mexico at midday in full sunlight on the deck of the ship, and it was all bright specular reflections on the wood and the brass and everything. And Peter decided that he wanted to make it 5 o'clock in the morning in deep fog.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had been trying it, and they couldn't work it out. And so Pablo said to them, when it was getting, a little tense, he said, "Look, just call in the big gun." And they said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "Just there's this guy in LA, give him a call, get him to come up." And so they called
the big gun,
and I went up, and I was the big gun. I didn't find that out until about a year after that happened, but I fixed it on the first night, and I worked out a way to just using the color corrector in Inferno, just doing this really dramatic. I used to do this thing in compositing where I would take the color corrector and I would crank it so out of control that it would actually break the image. But then I'd use those images, broken image, to then recomposite the image to make something new. I was working the night shift, so that was the only time they had the box available. And I went to the bathroom at about 7 o'clock in the morning. And when I came back, the room was full of people. Oh, it's a little disturbing. And then this guy out of the room, and it was this guy, producer from Paramount, Fred Chandler. And Fred was the guy that I had my very first interview with in LA when I first came to the States.
Full circle.
And he walked out of the room and he goes, my little Aussie buddy. He goes, come in and meet Peter. And for me, that was just insane, because Peter Weir has been a hero of mine since Picnic at Hanging Rock and The Cars That Ate Paris. And
he's incredible.
Yeah. And so I walked in and he said, hey, oh, you're an Aussie. Oh, cool. Did you do this? And I said, yeah. And he goes, it's fantastic, mate. He said, it's exactly what I want. And he turned to Jim Morris, who was the head of ILM, and he said, hire this guy full time right now. And so Jim said, just come in the hallway with me for a sec. So we went out into the hall and he said, are you available? And I said, yes. He said, can you start full time? And I said, oh, yes. He says, okay, welcome to ILM. And so I did that. So that was the footing in the door. And then during my years at ILM, about a year and a half into that time, maybe 2 years after that, Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith came up. And I worked in a department where the system we used was the Discrete Logic Inferno. But within ILM, it was called Sabre. Everybody in the Sabre department had come from episodic television and commercial kind of backgrounds, where we were all charged with coming up with really high quality imagery and solutions very quickly, because we were used to working in the kind of advertising schedules and budgets. And so it was an incredible team to work with. And I think those guys are some of the best artists in the world. I mean, I was very lucky to be included in that team.
You're the big guy.
Yeah. So it was really nice. And we, I went up for a 4-week gig. I ended up staying a few years and doing 17 movies. And one of them was Star Wars. I remember, when you're working on a shot, you're drawing and you're looking at the screen and you're going, okay, so there's that little bit there. Okay. You sit and you look at it and doing a little bit more, and then you sit back. And then I just went, oh my God, it's Yoda. And I was doing a hologram shot of Yoda sitting in a conference room. And then we had a shot where Padme tells Anakin that she's pregnant. And it was a tight shot over Hayden Christensen's shoulder. And George had shot 3 takes. And he decided in editorial to use her from one take, Hayden from the other take, and the hand from the third take.
If you believe the behind-the-scenes footage, he does that quite a bit.
He does it a lot, yeah. The hand that they were using was missing fingers because there was a face that was not there, because the face that he was using was further back. And so I went to John Knoll, who, John and his brother Tom invented Photoshop, and John was the visual effects supervisor on the film. And I said, so what am I going to do? And he goes, I don't know, make it up. And he said, I've got this new camera. Look at this stills camera. It's really nice. It's like a 12 megapixel camera. You want to try that? And so I went and I got a tiny little bit of green screen, and I printed out frames from the shot so that I knew what the lighting was. And I put the green screen on the back of my Jeep, just duct taped it to the back of the Jeep, positioned the Jeep out in the parking lot so that it was matching the lighting position, and then just kept on moving my hand in. And I was holding the motor drive camera, going, taking all these shots as my hand rolled in, and then took those frames back and we loaded them all into the box, and I took the ones that made the best fit. And so as the hand comes in, it's from here, the thumb back is Hayden Christensen, but from there it's me, and it goes behind her face, and then when it comes out, it's all Hayden. But
there you are. You're in a Star Wars film.
So I'm in a Star Wars film, and then I'm also in there as a hologram of Emperor Palpatine from behind. And they realized in editorial that there was a shot that they had missed, And it was just that one time. I mean, it may have been that they came up with the idea for the shot in post, and they didn't have a shot of Emperor Palpatine from the back. And so I said to them, well, do we have the costumes? And everything, they'd been shot in Sydney. And the costumes had just arrived that day. And I said, well, find the Palpatine costume and I'll come and get it. And
Wow.
so my mate Sam Edwards, who's another visual effects supervisor now, he had a little video handy cam. And so we went out in the car park at the back of E building at ILM, and I stood on the picnic table, and he got down low so he was matching the angle, and he shot it with his handy cam, and we loaded that handy cam footage. And I'm wearing the Palpatine cloak, and I took it into the system and made it look like a hologram, and it's in the movie. I think one of the cool things about ILM is that if you ever get very large crowds of people, they're usually the crew from ILM.
Yes.
They're the cheapest labor, and they're there and they're available, and of course they want to be in the movie. So,
how did it feel putting on Palpatine's costume?
Brief. We were under a very tight deadline, but it was cool. It was fun to put that on, and again, you're kind of touching these elements of amazing characters. The husband and wife team, Dave and Lou Elsie, who did the makeup for that movie, made Chewbacca's head, and I went over to the makeup stage one day, and they were shooting a bunch of extra Wookiee stuff on the ILM stage, and as I walked over there, Peter Mayhew was sitting in a beach chair with the head off, with the rest of the costume just sitting there having a cigarette, and that was funny to see. And then I walked in, and they gave me the head and said, "Here, have a look at this." So, you get to be involved in all those sides of it as well, which is pretty amazing.
What an incredible full circle moment. Not only do you work on Star Wars, you appear in it, and it's filmed in Sydney, Australia.
Yeah. Yeah, and all three of the prequels were shot in Sydney. And David Tattersall, who was the DP on that, I ended up working with in China on a project that never actually got made. But we spent 4 months there prepping a project. And yeah, he loved working in Australia. And I know every time the ILM crews went to Australia, they, like Hook was shot up in Queensland, and a lot of other films were shot there, and they love the Australian crews, and they obviously love the weather, and it's there's a reason why lots of films get made there, because people love the people, and they just love being there.
Your list is obviously so extensive, but the other one that caught my eye was The Social Network, which was memorable for making Armie Hammer, the Winklevoss twins.
Yeah, I didn't work on those shots, but there was a company that was charged with putting the computer screens in the film. And David Fincher, who I had worked with years earlier, doing commercials with David, he was an old ILM visual effects person before he was the director. And so he understood the process very well. He didn't want to put anything on the screens because he wanted to be able to decide later on what went in there. And so I got called in, and we streamlined this way of just filling all the screens and tracking all the shots. And they were very hard. They were deceptively simple shots. There was a thing that the DP on that film did where they would just kind of ride the focus just really minutely in and out. And if you just looked at the shot, you thought the focus was fixed. But if you were trying to stick something into it, all the edges would go wrong. And so we had to be tracking the focus on the shot all the time as well. And when you've got a room with like 200 computer screens in it, and they're all overlapping each other, and their laptops and big screens and all that stuff, and it became a very complex thing. But there were 3 of us on the show. It was a very small company run by my friend Ron Barr, and he was the visual effects producer. I was the visual effects supervisor. And then the other guy that was with us, the 3 of us all composited. And we were literally going 24 hours a day for a couple of months doing, I think, 400 shots. But it was fun. I mean, we made it all work, and we met the deadline. And it's another one of those pretty amazing films to be part of.
For sure. And as you say, often what appears the simplest is the most technically challenging. And invisible VFX is really what it's all about now.
Yeah, When I was working on Star Trek, I was very lucky to get to speak with. I met him ultimately, but initially I spoke with him on the phone. A guy called Linwood Dunn, and in the 1920s, Lynn invented a thing called the Acme Dunn optical printer, and the optical printer was the thing that allowed you to take multiple rolls of film, and they're all rolling in front of each other, and the light would shine through them, and it would combine all the images together and be recorded on another piece of film at the other end.
That's how much of a geek I was. I was obsessed with the optical printer as a child.
Yeah, yeah. So he basically invented my job, and he did all the comps for King Kong and Gone with the Wind and Citizen Kane and Bringing Up Baby and all these amazing films. So I was talking to him on the phone one night, and he called me while I was working on Star Trek, and I nearly fell off the phone when he said it was like done. And I think at the time Len was about 92 or 3, and he was off on his way to a SMPTE meeting that night, even at that age, because he was very, very much involved in the business. And I said to him at one point, so if I'm going to ask anybody this question, it has to be you, because you invented my job. What is the one guiding principle that you would give for a long career in visual effects? And he said, oh, that's easy. He said, you spend your entire life being invisible. And I said, okay, why? And he said, you only have one purpose in this job, my boy, and that is to serve the story. He said, if you do a shot that is done in such a way that somebody says, wow, what a cool effect, you failed because you made it about you. Be invisible and you'll be here forever. And I thought it was an incredible piece of advice. And he said, do shots that no one notices and you'll be here forever. And I think it kind of applies to everything and everybody. If you're there supporting the team and supporting the project overall, what you're doing is actually just telling the story. You don't want it to be about you. You just want it to be about, it's like when people see the shot in Titanic of Jack and Rose running down the corridor. They don't want to know that it was a guy compositing digitally painted faces onto stunt people. They want to believe that it's two people running away from a wall of water. And if they don't believe that, then you fail. So, yeah.
And there's now a trend in publicity and behind the scenes footage to say there's no CGI. When of course there's CGI, but it's invisible.
Well, I think it's interesting when people say there was one very large movie recently, which will go nameless, that said there was zero CGI. But then you look at the credits and there's 2,500 people in the visual effects credits. Well, if there's no CGI, then what did all those people do on the movie?
What were they doing?
They were doing a lot of work. I mean, there's a lot of work in that film that is absolutely in camera and astoundingly brilliant. But there's a lot of help as well. And, one of the things that people don't realize about visual effects is that people think about visual effects and they think it's just all the big stuff. But sometimes it's something as simple as just replacing a sky or adding a cloud to something or changing a reflection in a pair of sunglasses. And they're things that no one should notice ever. But when people say CGI sucks and miniatures were the best, it's because the stuff that they're looking at was not done well. But if it's done well, you should never know that it was CG or a comp or a matte painting or a miniature or anything. You should just believe that it's real in the story.
That's incredibly sage advice. So you have the most amazing visual effects career, and you've been very generous talking about a lot of it. What's next for you in visual effects?
But waiting to see. The business is going through an interesting and very challenging time at the moment. When the actors and writers went out on strike, the business kind of shut down. Everybody is waiting to see how it picks back up again. Lauren says to me all the time that I'm a ridiculous optimist, but I have to be. I think the business has gone through so many ups and downs, and you have to just believe that things are going to improve and get better and allow you to do better work. So, I'm talking to lots of people about potential projects at the moment. I've still got a few things on my bucket list that I would love to do. And so, we just see how those projects go. I would love to work on a Bond film.
You may get your chance soon.
Who knows? I'm talking to Amazon about possibilities. I worked on the Harry Potter ride at Universal Studios. I supervised that. It's called Harry Potter and the Forbidden Journey, and we spent 2.5 years making that ride. And the executive producer of that and of the movies, David Heyman, is now producing the Bond films for Amazon. So the second that press release came out, an email was shot straight to David.
Everybody needs the big gun.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. But look, I've been incredibly lucky to work on amazing projects.
Well, there is luck, but there's also aptitude, and you've proven that in spades.
Absolutely. I think anybody who says luck is not involved in their success is just lying to themselves, because without luck, most of us would never be where we are. But you have to be able to do the job, because if you can't do the job, you don't even set foot inside the door of the office of the people who are going to give you the job.
Yes.
Because they don't want to know you, because you have nothing to offer them. But if you have the skill set, you have something to offer them, and it can be a very successful thing,
as you have proven. Now, you've got a truckload of Emmys, some of which are behind you and your team. But because you don't do enough, you are also an amazing artist, and you spoke about painting your mother earlier, and I spoke about your self-portrait as the Mad Hatter. Tell us about that.
I've always painted and always drawn my whole life. One of the things that I do when I'm hiring crews to work on the films is I ask them if they can draw. I don't want them to say, well, yeah, I can make something in AI. I want to know if they can pick up a pencil or a paintbrush and create something from scratch on a blank piece of paper or a blank canvas. And so I've been doing that for years. Around 2017, I was inspired by an old friend of mine from ILM who had actually left the visual effects business and started painting portraits in watercolors. And Misty Segura Bowers, you should look her up. Her work is absolutely astounding. But that kind of inspired me and gave me a kickstart to just start doing painting portraits again. And so I started doing color pencil portraits, inspired by the work of Drew Struzan and Mark Ratz and great movie poster artists. But it wasn't quite there, and I felt frustrated with that stuff, and so I stopped for a little while. And then I found out about this beautiful tool that Adobe made called Fresco. And a Fresco only works on the iPad. It works on the iPad with an Apple Pencil. And it basically is a complete art studio on your iPad. And nothing is automated. You have to, one brush stroke at a time. Every line, every brush stroke, everything is made by a human being. The beauty of it is that you don't have to have all the mess. You don't have all the weight of the stuff that you carry around with you. You can carry the entire thing on your iPad. Right here. So I've got an old iPad. This is mine. Oh yeah, by the way, that's the sticker on the back.
You do indeed do magic.
Yeah, but I paint everything on these, and I paint them at a very high resolution, and then I print them on metal. And when I found this tool, it just opened me up to being able to really express, my love of faces and detail, and so I've painted about 200 portraits now. They're all on my website, adamhoward.art.
Thank you very much. I was going to ask.
Yeah. www.adamhoward.art. And it's really fun. I've been doing a thing in the last, maybe the last month, where I do the painting of the day, and I post those on Facebook and on LinkedIn and Instagram, and I just pick a different portrait. Sometimes if it's the person's birthday, I'll do that. And I've also done a bunch of tribute ones to people who inspired me, like Steven Spielberg and who else? John Bruno and V. Neil, makeup artist.
Yes, and they're incredibly detailed.
Yeah, they're fun. They're a lot of fun to do. Some of them take a small amount of time to do. Some of them take a long time to do. But you just keep on going until it feels right. And I'm available for commissions. So if anybody's interested in that, you can reach out to me on the website and commission me to paint a portrait for you. They do not have to be of celebrities. I paint them of anybody, family members and pets and all kinds of stuff. But that's just a really nice way to keep my hand in, quite literally, just creating while you wait for the next film project to start up.
Well, I'd ask you how you find the time, but I guess there is a lot of waiting in this business too.
There is a lot of waiting. I mean, I think when kids are learning in school, they think that they go to film school and they think that they're going to go to a set and it's going to be wow, 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 go, 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 go. And there's a lot of this. You're just waiting. You're waiting for your moment. But the thing that I love about the whole dynamic of being on a film set is that you may have 200 people on the set. Each person's got their own little bit that they have to do. And it's like an orchestra playing. You know, when the violas come in, that they've got their moment to come in. The French horns have their moment to come in, and the double bass has their moment to come in. It's the same with the film crew, and you can have 2 people in the shot, but 200 people behind the camera, and they're all doing their little bit to make sure that the wind blows at the right time and the right amount of leaves flow into the shot and the reflections hit their hair the right way. And it's absolute magic. And I don't think I'll ever get tired of that. I love the whole process of making movies and illusion. You know, it's all about illusion. You're creating an illusion that started for me in Melbourne at Aladdin's Magic Shop in Mbank Arcade when I was 10 years old. So, you know, when you realize that you can make people believe something that absolutely did not happen, just through some movie magic, it's pretty cool.
And can I say, as an observation, as we finish, I love the fact that you still sound Australian.
Thank you. Yeah, 35 years in the States. But I love my Aussie accent. You know, I'm a Melbourne boy, ultimately. And I love that.
Look, you have been so incredibly generous with your time. I've found it absolutely fascinating. I could talk to you for hours. I may impose that on you at some stage. But what do I say now? Live long and prosper.
Absolutely, that one.
If you're enjoying these, please subscribe, please like, please comment. It all helps me make more of these, and there are plenty of favorites to get through. Bye.